and we adopt it. So I now leave the floor to my colleague Lee Anderson.
Yes, so we move on to the joint part, the joint hearing between the two committees, the House Committee and the Ample Committee, and the agenda of our joint hearing. So if there are no objections, the agenda of the joint hearing will be deemed adopted. And it is adopted.
Thank you very much. So now we start the next part. So dear Ample Chair, dear Lee, dear members, dear guests, it's a great honor for me as a chair of the Special Committee on Housing to open today's joint hearing with Ample Committee as part of our Parliamentary Disability Rights Week, the third edition. This week reminds us that disability rights are core part of building a fair, inclusive, and truly European society where housing lies at the very heart of this promise. Because a home is never just a roof over one's head. It's the foundation for dignity, independence, and participation in education, work, and community life. Accessible infrastructure is not charity. It is a fundamental human right. Physical barriers, discrimination, and insufficient support services prevent many from fully participating in housing markets and community life. As legislators, we must be clear. Accessible, affordable, and adequate housing is a fundamental right, not a privilege. This means integrating accessibility requirements into EU housing policies, supporting independent living models, and ensuring that vulnerable groups benefit from housing initiatives. It means using EU funds to finance accessible housing, developing universal design standards, and coordinating housing policies with support services. Our cooperation today between the Housing and Employment Committees underscores a simple truth. Housing and social policy are inseparable. We must move beyond pity and inspiration. This hearing is therefore not only about identifying barriers, it is foremost about shaping solutions, from inclusive design standards and innovative housing models to urban planning strategies, policies that ensure inclusive housing for all. Let us use this Disability Rights Week not only to reflect, but to commit to practical action, to concrete legislative progress, and to a Europe where no one is left behind because of where they live or how they live. I look forward to a constructive discussion with our members, experts, and with the Commission. Lee.
Thank you very much, dear Chair Tinagli, dear members, dear guests. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this joint public hearing. As the Chair of the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs, I am honored to co-chair today's discussion with the House Special Committee. Our continued cooperation reflects an important reality. Housing is far more than a question of buildings. It is a question of rights, inclusion, and equal opportunities. Across the European Union, persons with disabilities, young people, and other vulnerable groups still face significant barriers in finding housing that is adequate, accessible, and affordable. These challenges affect not only where people live, but also their ability to work, to study, and to participate fully in community life. And they are made even more pressing in a context where house prices have risen by more than 55% since 2010, and rents by almost 27%, with persons with disabilities among those most affected. Housing policy and social policy are deeply interconnected. Without accessible housing, independent living remains out of reach for many people with disabilities. Without affordable options, young people struggle to move for education, training, or work. And without coordinated support services, the broader promise of social inclusion remains incomplete. Today's hearing is also significant because together with the Sant and Agri committees parallelly, we are opening the third edition of the Disability Rights Week, Parliament's annual initiative to highlight disability rights across all areas of EU policy making. Throughout this week, committees and stakeholders will hold meetings and hearings, debates, and awareness-raising activities to identify barriers, share good practices, and strengthen accessibility. To make today's discussion more inclusive, we are also providing sign language interpretation and a speech-to-text language, which is a pilot project of DigiTrad. Just scan the QR code displayed in the room with your phone or your tablet, and a web page will open, and you can follow the live transcription. For translation, you can choose your preferred language from the available options in the menu. As this service is still in development, DigiTrad's speech-to-text unit welcomes all feedback. I look forward to constructive and solutions-oriented exchange with our members, our experts, and the Commission as we explore how Europe can move closer to truly inclusive housing for all. Now I would like to invite you to listen to a video message from the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, launching this year's Disability Rights Week.
Ladies and gentlemen, this House's Disability Rights Week is a moment in our calendars we have all come to look forward to as an opportunity to reflect on our progress, assess the challenges ahead, and most importantly, recommit to making Europe work for everyone. We all know the statistics. Over 100 million people in our union live with a disability, whether visible or invisible. Each person is somebody's child, colleague, neighbor, friend. Someone who has to fight every day against barriers that should no longer exist to education, employment, mobility, and public space. As their elected representatives entrusted with improving their lives, it is our duty as legislators to demolish these barriers and help every European to achieve their full potential, human, social, and economic. As President, I am proud of how this Parliament is stepping up to the challenge. Our Disability Intergroup is spearheading efforts to make our union more accessible. And I'm grateful to my colleagues here for organising such a fantastic week, as you always do. Now it is up to all of us to maintain this momentum, not just when the attention is on us, but every week, every day. This House also looks forward to the Commission's update to the European Disability Rights Strategy. And on our side, we have upgraded our infrastructure across all our buildings, from adapted conference rooms to more inclusive interpretation. This is all progress. We still have a lot to do, and we must never stop striving to be even better. So my request to you all today is keep up the good work, because Europe will only change if we change it ourselves, and we can only move forward towards a better, more equal future if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Sergio Urbani, General Manager and CEO of Fondazione Cariplo. Fondazione Cariplo, established in 1991, is a leading philanthropic foundation. Mr. Urbani, we are very much looking forward to hearing your perspective on how EU funds and policies can support inclusive and accessible housing, particularly for persons with disabilities, young people, and other vulnerable groups. Your insights on integrating accessibility standards and universal design principles into housing initiatives through EU funding will be invaluable for our discussion. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And the floor is yours. You have about 8 minutes.
I would like to thank the chair, the co-chair, and all you honorable members for this invitation and for dedicating this hearing to an issue that is a concrete challenge for our foundation and for Europe today. So the right to inclusive, accessible, and affordable housing. But let me start just with 2 words on Fondazione Cariplo. Please, next slide. Okay, we are one of the major philanthropic foundations in Italy and one of the majors also in Europe. We were created in 1991 following to the separation between banking activities, and we inherited the philanthropic mission of the former savings bank of the provinces of Lombardy. Today, we are a grant-making foundation. We have an endowment of 12.5 billion in assets. And we are shareholding of Intesa San Paolo Bank, which accounts for about 1/3 of our endowment. Every year, we support thousands of non-profit organizations and public also organizations through grants. In 2026, our philanthropic budget will be 215 million euros, and we focus on 4 main areas: social inclusion, scientific research, environment, and culture. So next slide, please. Recently, we also have decided to focus on some major interdisciplinary challenges chosen by our governing bodies. And the 4 major strategic challenges are disability, NEET, so not in employment, education, or training, where we want to align our region to the objectives of Europe, early childhood, and incarceration. Next slide, please. But I would like to introduce the topic of social housing with a short clip. This clip will last no longer than a minute, but it will give you the flavor of one of the most important projects our foundation has been working to since the beginning of its activity. Thank you.
Cariplo Foundation has long been committed to addressing housing needs. Since 2000, it has allocated 77 million euros in grants to create over 6,500 beds or apartments for those facing severe social challenges. In 2004, it established the Social Housing Foundation, FHS, which acts as a promoter and facilitator of social housing initiatives, often implemented by real estate investment funds, providing support in project development, urban and architectural planning, housing-related welfare services, and community building. In Lombardy, FHS helped create 3,000 housing units, community engagement programs for over 3,000 families, and the establishment of 6 residents' associations. In 2019, Cariplo Foundation created Redo SGR Benefit Corporation, a real estate fund manager focused on investments with positive social and environmental impact. Today, Redo manages a portfolio worth over 1.5 billion euros, has delivered 9,600 housing units across 40 projects, and developed 6 student residences with a total of 1,882 beds. To date, the Foundation's total investment in real estate funds for social housing and urban regeneration exceeds 160 million euros.
So, as you heard, we started working in housing in year 2000, and we financed shelters and solutions for people in vulnerable situations, including people with disabilities. But after a few years, we also saw a different but urgent need, the need of several thousands of families who earn between 2,000 and 3,000 euro per month, such as teachers, nurses, public employees, the so-called key workers. Key because they are crucial for the functioning of our communities. And in cities like Milan, where job opportunities grow fast, these people are literally priced out of the housing market. They cannot plan their future, build a family, or simply live with dignity close enough to the place where they work. And this is not only a social issue, this is a cohesion and competitiveness factor for our communities. So in 2004, with the Polytechnic University of Milan, we studied how to attract long-term capital to affordable rental housing projects. And we pioneered the use of ethical, today we would better say impact, real estate funds based on 3 pillars: public land, patient investors accepting returns of only 3% above inflation over an horizon of 30 years, and invest in communities, not in buildings, so at least 100 homes per site with services and shared spaces. This model was then scaled up at a national level by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, with a 2 billion euros national fund of funds, which then mobilized a total of 4 billion euros across 30 local real estate funds. Within this program, Fondazione Cariplo has already delivered 3,000 rental homes, another 3,000 are under development, with a rent of some 500 euros per month on average. 1,000 student housing beds, another 2,200 are under development. In this case, the bed is rented at some 550 euro per month, including services and VAT. Our approach is simple and complex at the same time. As I said before, we design communities and not buildings. Homes and neighborhoods are obviously well planned, energy efficient, these are Class A dwellings, with services and shared spaces that foster participation and inclusion. And we call this a particular form of PPP, which in this case is public philanthropic partnership. So the public sector, philanthropy, private capital, and community organizations work together. To make this possible, we created, over the last 20 years, FHS, Fondazione Housing Sociale, which served as a cultural reference and as a development agent for the whole program. RIDU, which is a real estate fund management company that executes our projects. EDERA, which is an R&D center dedicated to the residential units, also promoting Energy Sprong Italy, which is a Dutch program dedicated to energy industrialized retrofitting of the buildings, among other initiatives. And Indomus, which is a student housing operator supporting both the accommodation and the community life of students. This model has worked over the last 10 years, but the context today has severely changed. Construction costs have more than doubled, from 1,000 euros per square meter to 2,000 euros per square meter. Public land is scarce, and patient institutional capital is even more than scarce. And unfortunately, salaries did not increase. The rents we want to offer are still the same. So we are now evolving the model. We are working with cooperatives of inhabitants, which can blend the members' equity as a first risk capital, mission-driven investors' equity, such as foundations, institutional investors, but also corporations and employers, providing a second risk capital, and then bank lending supported by public guarantees. So we think that this model can really adapt and fulfill our mission, whereby real estate funds will focus on urban regeneration to carve out the land for social opportunities, and will create the best conditions for new cooperatives to develop their rental housing projects. So as a final comment, we would hope that Europe will scale up effectively including housing models, will ensure some European funds to improve long-term sustainability both on the side of tenants and of social landlords, will continue to invest in youth, key workers, and people with special needs, will back public philanthropic partnerships, and will align, as you well said, housing policies with employment and social policies to foster an holistic approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Mrs. Catherine Norton, who is the Executive Director of the European Disability Forum. We are very much looking forward to hearing your perspective on accessibility and independent living, in particular the challenges on the ground and what more is needed to ensure that persons with disabilities can truly participate in community life. So please, the floor is yours for 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, chairpersons and members of the committee. So I'm working for the European Disability Forum, which is an umbrella organisation of organisations of persons with disabilities. And we work together to advance the rights of people with disabilities at the EU level, so in EU policies, legislation, funding and dialogue. And I would like to really thank you for kicking off the Disability Rights Week with this really important topic. We're very pleased to be able to speak about inclusive housing for all, especially since we're waiting for the publication of the Affordable Housing Strategy, which will be released. In fact, I think everyone in the audience knows already that the issue of housing for persons with disabilities, or the lack of it, has been a problem for people with disabilities in Europe for a long time. Before the energy crisis, before speculation on property prices or rising rents, persons with disabilities have already experienced a severe shortage of accessible and affordable housing in their everyday lives. And we also know that we have a history in Europe of obliging persons with disabilities to live in segregated institutions. So to make it more practicable, I just wanted to give the example of a person moving to Brussels for work who's a wheelchair user. So first, especially if you're new to Belgium, social housing won't be accessible to you. So you'll have to look in the free rental market. Most flats will not be accessible, which means that, for example, if you're a wheelchair user, that you have a wide enough door frame, that you have a level access from the street and inside your building, that you would have an accessible bathroom or adapted kitchen with lower work surfaces. Your choice in this regard will be really limited. And if you do find a suitable flat, it will be extremely expensive. Can you afford it with your entry-level salary? Furthermore, since you're newly arriving in Belgium, your disability status will not be recognised, so you will not have any access to disability allowance or other kinds of support. But probably you won't find such a flat, so you have two options. You decline the job or you make do with what there is. If you opt to make do with what there is, you could mean you're ending up in a flat where you can't use the kitchen or bathroom independently, or you can't have access to all the rooms. Often people end up putting their bedroom, their bed in the living room, and that you won't have sufficient privacy if you're sharing the flat with others or indeed with a personal assistant. Even if your building has a lift, which allows you to access your flat, it can happen that the lift is broken and you will be trapped in your own home for days. And this has happened to one of the members of our executive committee, I think twice for long periods in the last year, where she hasn't been able to show up for events here in the Parliament or other EU institutions because of being trapped in the apartment. So, besides these examples, we know from European data that 11% of persons with disabilities in the EU are overburdened by the cost of their housing, and only 28.9% of persons with disabilities consider their dwelling meets their needs. We know that 28.8% of persons with disabilities in the EU are currently at risk of poverty, and that rises up to 35.6% for people with high support needs. The housing crisis for persons with disabilities exacerbates the risk of social exclusion, and it's a European-wide issue. EDF, the European Disability Forum, was really pleased to see housing coming higher on the EU agenda, with the appointment, for example, of the Commissioner for Housing, and with the establishment, of course, of this specific committee. We recently adopted a resolution calling on the EU decision makers to take circumstances of persons with disabilities into account when developing the new EU Affordable Housing Plan. We need to have housing which is both affordable and accessible. One of our key demands is to address accessibility as part of the long-term sustainability strategy, because as our population is ageing, we need more accessible housing in the future. Each one of us in this room would be better off living in an accessible house for when we grow older, when our family members need it. It is really a public good for everybody. We also advocate for a tool for financing accessibility measures for people in their private or rented homes, because often cost is a barrier to making people's houses more accessible and allowing them to stay and live in their own house. So one thing that I wanted to point out is that it is really a shame today that still public housing is built which is not accessible, because it is way cheaper to make all buildings, all public buildings and all houses accessible if you do it from the beginning, from the design stage. Many studies have shown this. I won't go into a lot of detail. I think you all know that this is quite obvious. It's around 1%, 1.7% more expensive if you do it at the beginning. So this is really a call for this committee, members of the committee, to ensure that there are accessibility requirements in any housing or any public buildings that are funded by the EU. So we need to ensure that EU funding is only spent on accessible infrastructure, including housing. Besides the increased risk of poverty and social exclusion, the lack of accessible and affordable housing in the community is a key factor in persons with disabilities ending up in institutions, unable to exercise their right to choose where and with whom to live and be part of their communities. This is not an area, unfortunately, where we're getting better. According to Eurofund, 13 EU member states have in fact increased the number of adults with disabilities living in institutions in the past 10 years. To our knowledge, right now, we can be ashamed to say that 1.5 million persons with disabilities are currently institutionalised. I have my colleague here beside me from the Youth Forum who will talk about young people. You can imagine that for many young people in Europe today with disabilities, their choice is institution or staying living with their parents. This is not a real choice. We therefore ask all MEPs and other decision makers involved to strive for an ambitious policy on housing, which includes adherence with existing accessibility standards, such as the EN 17210. The standards are there. Further policy development to guarantee accessibility of new and renovated buildings, and adequate financial support. Only this can guarantee a way towards independent living for persons with disabilities. Members of these committees today it's a very important moment. We have the Affordable Housing Strategy, which is historic. We have the next phase of the Disability Strategy, which President Metsola just alluded to, which will be published next year. And we have, of course, the next EU budget, which is an incredible opportunity to make a lasting impact on people's lives. And I think that we all know that one of the most important issues for the Parliament and for the EU institutions is that people in Europe feel benefit of being European citizens. And I think investment in affordable and accessible housing could make that difference. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And next, I would like to invite Radesh Voisu, who is the president of the European Youth Forum, who was already referred to speak about the housing barriers affecting especially young people and other socially disadvantaged groups. So please, the floor is yours for the next 8 minutes.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Chairs, members of the committee, on behalf of the European Youth Forum, I'd like to thank you for having us here today and for having the opportunity to actually address this issue heads-on, the issue of housing that increasingly shapes the daily lived realities of millions of young people across the European Union. So the ability to access stable, adequate, affordable housing. And I think it was you, Madam Chair Tinagli, who said that housing is more than a roof. And that's precisely our motto at the European Youth Forum. Housing is more than a roof. It is the center of our lives as young people. It is the center where a community, where your family, where your entire, at times, social life develops and grows and unfolds. Which is why it is so important for it to be available to you in affordable and adequate conditions. And that is exactly the thing, that for many young people today across our continent, the basic housing conditions for a reasonable quality of life are absolutely not a given. And I would look around the room for everyone who maybe is not a young person today to ask yourselves, to which extent did you face this issue when you were growing up? To which extent you faced this issue when you were moving out from your parents' home? And see, having this ability to secure a decent place to live, and that doesn't cost you an absolute fortune, and that allows you to live with dignity, has become more complicated, more delayed, and more fragile than it was even 15 years ago. A very clear sign of this, and I know this, it's a number that you hear very, very often, but I just think it really puts things in perspective, is the age at which young people leave the parental home. So when you move away from your parents, basically. This age has increased by 2.5 years in the past decade. So now you are expected, or a young person leaves the parental home once they are above the age of 26. And indeed, as Catherine was mentioning, the reality is even more stark for young people with disabilities who do not oftentimes have the support or the ability or the spaces and the facilities to be able to do this.
Sorry, the interpreters are asking you to speak a little bit slower so they will have time to follow.
I apologize. You're very enthusiastic about the topic, but I will slow down. So it's true that moving out of your parents' home no longer represents one single straightforward step. Many young people move out of their homes and then they are forced to move back in with their parents when their rents maybe rise beyond their means, when their contracts end, when their incomes fall short from being able to pay their rents. So in other words, housing is not just expensive for young people, and it's not just unattainable for young people. It is an uncertainty that we all have to live with every single day. And for many of us, the fear of your rent being increased, the fear of arbitrary eviction, or having to call your family to return back home because you don't have a place to live anymore is a reality that's never very far away for any of us. And there are two factors that really drive this reality. And the first one is that the cost of housing relative to young people's incomes has become increasingly unbalanced. We know that many young people nowadays, myself included, spend upwards of 40% of our income on putting a roof over our heads. And this already comes from lower or generally more precarious earnings. In many European cities, we see that rents have immensely outpaced wage growth, 3 to 1, and average mortgages can be 15 to 20 times that of an average annual young person's salary, as opposed to what we know as the affordability threshold, which is 3 to 5 times. But you don't necessarily need to take my word for it. We have asked young people across Europe what their struggles are, and you can hear it, for example, from Leo, from Ireland, who is 19 years old and has just moved for university and is afraid to take a shower because the floor of their bathroom, the bathroom in which he lives with his housemates, is so damaged by water and mold that they're concerned that the floor will collapse under them if they take a shower. You can hear it from Lotte, who is 28 and lives in the Netherlands, and says that she's pretty sure that the housing that she lives in is illegal, but she has no choice if she wants to find a decent and stable job. You have all of these realities and many more in a booklet outside of the room, but the truth is that even when young people do access housing, it is oftentimes precarious. And the private rental market, where most of us young people live, nearly half of us fear that we could lose our accommodation within 3 months, very often because of rent hikes that we cannot afford, simply. So all these high costs and this prevailing sense of insecurity limit young people's autonomy and the choices we can make, whether we're talking about decisions about where we study, where we want to work or to train. All of these decisions that should naturally be guided by interest are no longer guided solely by interest, but rather by where we can realistically find a place to live. And the geographies are smaller, especially for those of us who cannot rely on our parents' support in case things go south. But all of these pressures that I just mentioned, and that I, looking around the room at other young people around here, I know we all feel them, but they're only symptoms of a much deeper and much structural problem that we're talking about. So if we're talking about all these barriers, we need to reckon and to come head to head with what is actually causing the issue. A big shift has been the financialization of housing. So our understanding has shifted from housing as a good and housing as a right to housing as an object that is supposed to produce profit, and that's it. Over the past decade, data shows us that institutional investors, private equity firms, and large corporate landlords have expanded massively across the housing markets, and this is a fact. And now we see that their influence is substantial. They have taken over many housing markets. In Ireland, for example, they've purchased nearly half of all new housing since 2017. In Sweden, they own a quarter of all private rental apartments. In Berlin, for example, they control roughly 10% of all housing assets. And in some of the largest cities in the Netherlands, they bought 1/4 of all homes sold in recent years. What this does is that it reshapes both who young people rent from, and what type of housing is built. And very importantly, much of this activity focuses on acquiring existing homes or developing amazing, flashy, very expensive, high-end units, rather than building housing that actually matches the affordability needs that young people have. In cities where young people go to study or they go to start their careers, this dynamic is particularly damaging because it contributes to gentrification and it really pushes entry-level renters into poor quality and, as you heard earlier, overcrowded homes that are sometimes flat out dangerous to live in. And this financialization is compounded by a persistent shortage of genuinely affordable, social and youth-appropriate housing. In many major member states, supply, particularly of social and affordable rentals, falls very short of what is actually needed. And labor market insecurity only deepens these barriers. Young workers are disproportionately on temporary or part-time contracts, or they rely on internships and low starting wages. And even when we can earn enough to pay rent, many of us struggle to meet the landlord's requirements for deposits, for guarantees, or for other clauses for contract stability. But the thing is, and this is great news for all of us and for all of you in particular, that none of these problems are inevitable. They are the direct result of policy choices, and they can be reversed by policy choices. So across Europe, we have real-world examples of what works when housing is treated as a social good rather than as an asset, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. A very important point is having strong non-profit and limited profit housing systems because they provide stable, good quality homes at fair prices, and they shelter young people from volatile markets. Cooperative housing models have created affordable, secure communities that are governed by the residents themselves. Another example is community land trusts that show us how separating land ownership from housing can keep homes permanently affordable even when they are in high-pressure cities. And cities that have regulated speculative investment and short-term rentals by restricting bulk purchases or by limiting tourist rentals, they all demonstrate that policy can rebalance the market for it to be more focused towards residents. So all these examples, to wrap up, they really prove to all of us that alternatives do exist and that they consistently deliver better outcomes for young people. Honorable members, the barriers young people face today are not immutable, but we need for this a forward-looking approach, including the upcoming EU Affordable Housing Plan, which requires us to have more affordable and social rental supply, to empower public and non-profit actors, to reduce speculative pressures on the housing market, and to ensure that housing policy reflects the realities of modern labor markets and the lived experiences of young people. We need to avoid oversimplifying the challenge with slogans like we just need to build more. We need to expand the supply, but it is not sufficient in and of itself. So, this is the core of the matter for young people seeking a secure place to call home. And unless we confront these issues head on with a lot of courage, we should expect very little to change in terms of the rights, the access to housing for young people, for housing that is more accessible, more affordable, and just less of an absolute hassle for young people all across the Union. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Joanna Zwojcinska from the Polish Association for Persons with Intellectual Disabilities. With your expertise, today's hearing will focus in the fourth panel specifically on inclusive housing models. We look forward to learning from practical examples of social and cooperative housing providers who are implementing universal design standards to ensure accessibility, independence, and social inclusion for persons with intellectual disabilities. Mrs. Zwojcinska, your insights will be invaluable in showing how inclusive housing can work in practice and how it can help vulnerable groups fully participate in community life. You have the floor.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me here and for giving me this opportunity to speak about supported housing, especially for persons with intellectual disability. This group of people are the most vulnerable to having to live in institutions. I have come from Poland, and I represent the Polish Association for Persons with Intellectual Disabilities. We have about 400 places where we take care of persons with intellectual disabilities. Poland takes, the Polish state takes actions aimed at supporting these groups. However, the needs are not yet met. The number of institutionalized persons with intellectual disabilities are about 40,000, and they live in about 400 homes dedicated to taking care of people with intellectual disabilities. I am from the city of Gdańsk, and our former late president, Mr. Adamowicz, devoted a lot of interest to providing good care to people with intellectual disabilities.
Konwencja ONZ o prawach
The UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities established a legally binding standard, which means that people with such disabilities must be treated as equal citizens. Disability is not a problem. It's a question about interacting with the barriers, and it is the state and institutions which are responsible for removing the barriers and ensuring accessibility. So this is connected with universal house design and services design. So it's about assistance, about affordable housing and transport. And the principle is not a single disabled person must be excluded from any area of life. Universal design ensures spaces which are accessible to all inhabitants, irrespective of their age, ability, mobility, and the needs, which may change over time. And including these principles in house design is justified from a social and economic point of view. The convention is the first document to define
pełnoprawnych
the convention is the first to treat disabled persons as equal citizens and imposes the duty to enable them to function in the society fully. So it translates into a change to how we approach housing and care. It is forbidden to sentence those people to life institutions. They must be able to live wherever they like and however they like.
zobowiązuje
So the convention obliges states to organize assistance services and other services in the community, and also creating support circles. So this is an obligation to remove barriers to equal treatment and to moving away from institutional life. The city of Gdańsk in 2016 made a systemic approach to this inclusive housing, this assisted housing, and made it a part of its program of development. And this program supports the people who are vulnerable to exclusion and makes it possible for such person to go on a path of independent living in the local community while providing them with necessary support. Universal design is about the idea of fully inclusive living, because it must be possible for disabled persons to live fully independently. And spaces designed in accordance with these principles do not exclude anyone. And the Gdańsk program covers training, housing, and assisted living housing. And this program is addressed to Gdańsk residents who are vulnerable to social exclusion or poverty and who are not able to achieve stable housing situation through their own means. and what they require is a universally designed set of support services and housing. And the principles of this program are in accordance with the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And there is also a guide for universal design, where it is stated how all municipal spaces should be adapted to the needs of persons with disabilities. This includes housing. And these principles of universal design include broad pavements, lack of thresholds, suitably designed spaces, so that there is less risk of tripping or falling down, that it is easier for a disabled person to use such spaces. Housing and homes which are adapted to various needs are especially suitable for people with children, for older people, for people with limited mobility, and such housing makes it possible to recover after a serious illness or an injury. So such houses, such homes, are a long-term investment. And our program is based on two models of housing. Assisted housing are at the disposal of the municipal family support center or other organizations. Supported housing model, on the other hand, works as follows. The resident has a rent contract and receives support from an assistant. So this is for persons who need everyday support, persons who are intellectually disabled, who have been homeless, or who have mental issues. The support within those two models of housing can have different levels of support, but if necessary, support can be provided 24 hours a day. And our housing in Gdańsk is dedicated to all people. Our housing organized by organization is for people who have intellectual disabilities, and we rent housing from the city of Gdańsk and then provide this housing to persons with disabilities. And support is provided by specialists who offer the services to all persons, to all the residents of Gdańsk who need such support. So this is, there are two options. A person can live there temporarily or can live there indefinitely. So here we apply the universal design model and we customize the design to the needs of such persons. In homes under the supported housing model, the residents have a legal title to the house and they pay the rent and other costs and have access to all the necessary services. People with disabilities are the key target group. They are not treated as a marginal group of persons. So this is a path towards an independent living. And this is about going away from institutionalizing people with disabilities. So it's about living in a local community instead of an institution. So the aim of the program is to move away from care, but towards independent living. Home first and then support. And this is in tune with the general trends worldwide. So we have 230 flats under this program. Over 500 persons were able to take advantage of this program. People from the groups of people with such needs. It's quite a lot, but still not enough. And the Gdańsk social housing program is one of the most advanced such programs in Poland. So, as I said, it's mainly about moving away from institutional care and towards independent living. The flats which are designed under this universal design model are more flexible and better meet the real needs of the society. Well, and developers potentially have broader group of interested buyers, and the costs of building such house is lower if you take the needs into account at the design stage, when compared to further possible modification adaptations. And the flats designed under this universal design model are considered to be flexible and they better meet the needs. The developers and house owners have more potential clients because these spaces are more universal and the cost at the design stage is much lower than if you had to modify such a house, such a home later. So this translates into better value at a later stage. And in this way, the residents can function independently. After 9 years of our programs, we can see that it has brought a great difference to persons who are especially vulnerable to social exclusion. And this program is a great instrument which enables them to live independently rather than in institutions. And we are pleased and we are proud that we are able to provide such opportunities to people with intellectual disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these insights. Now we open the floor for the Q&A session. And we start by giving the floor to Dana Marczulatis for the EPP.
Dziękuję bardzo, Pani Przewodnicząca.
Thank you so much, Chair, dear guests. I am very glad that today's meeting of our committees, Ample and House, deals with a subject that is fully devoted to people with disabilities. And thank you, Mrs. Cwojdzińska, for accepting our invitation and for coming from Gdańsk to share the information about this very good project about assisted housing and housing with support. They really do exist. I've been there, I've seen them. This is an amazing project which should be used in other places. So this is also something that I would like to achieve in our committee, and I would like our report that we are creating also to include the needs of people with disabilities. So my question is to Mrs. Cwojdzińska. Do you have any data which shows what is more profitable? Is it better to institutionalize people, or is it better economically to have this supported or assisted housing? What is economically more advantageous? Do you have any data and could you share it with us? Thank you.
W gdańskim programie mieszkalnictwa społecznego.
In the program from Gdańsk, I only talked about this small section that is led by our associations, but within the program we have about a dozen different formulas which are adjusted to people at the risk of exclusion for many reasons. One of those elements, which we started 9 years ago, is the mill house housing. This is a specially designed building, ecological, energy efficient, which houses people from different groups that are at risk of social exclusion, which in the past were either institutionalized or achieved support within institutions. And this support was financed by the city of Gdańsk. The investment was about 6 million zloty, and last year we drew conclusions on the projects, and from the experts' opinion that was seen by the city council, during these 9 years, almost everybody living there became independent, and the savings from this individual support amounted to about 11 million euros within 8 years.
We will take all of the questions now, and then we take the answers from the experts in the end. So with no worries. So just so we have time with all the questions.
Yes, let's move on. Now I give the floor to Isilda Gomez for S&D.
Chairs, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to thank the participants for their really interesting presentations that they brought to the debate. I wanted to start by saying in recent years, we've been talking about the housing crisis, but how did it affect a specific group of people, vulnerable people, disabled people, homeless people? They've always had housing problems, but no one ever mentioned it before, really. It's now become a crisis, and there has been no solution thus far. Finally, we're talking about them at long last. We're now seeing that we're giving them visibility, we're trying to find them responses to avoid the same people always being left behind. As I don't have much time, I won't go on at any more length really, but I just wanted to ask a few questions about the EU's role and how it can influence these member states' policies in this area. We know that many of the recommendations have been on how to create effective mechanisms have not been seen through. How can we come up with finance lines? How can we make people invest in these areas? How can we define that a percentage of investment in housing should be for disabled people and another percentage for homeless people? How can this be spread across different funds such as the RDF, ESF, or are there other measures that could be used? Whatever the measures are, the crucial thing is that they need to be robust. In the free market, we know that the market isn't going to correct the inequalities that these people are facing. That's why we need public policies that are courageous and determined so that we can build a fairer, more humanitarian Europe. Thank you.
Obrigada. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Klara Dostalova. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, Mr. Pál Sekeres.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak Hungarian. So just I wait a few moments for the headphones. Tisztelt elnök asszonyok, és tisztelt
Chairs. Good afternoon to the civil society representatives. Since 91, I have been a wheelchair user. If I may sum up what we've heard this afternoon, we need more attention, more financing.
Egy megvalósítandó feladat, de
we have set and heard much about major ambitious targets, but I have to say that I believe that employment is as important as housing. We need all the relevant services also. We need to look at how we can move people out of institutions into independent living. And that is where ancillary services and employment would come into play. We need to ensure that housing is fully accessible. We encounter this difficulty in many buildings. Indeed, in many member states, we have heritage protection laws and rules on accessibility that clash. Of course, it is very important that we protect our cultural heritage, but it is equally important that all such buildings are accessible for all. These accessible buildings and different flats must also be affordable. I would welcome any programmes geared towards that goal. For example, that young people receive some sort of tax discount when purchasing their first home. I would underscore what Mrs. Metsola said. It is important that we focus on these issues, not just this week, but throughout the year. This must be mainstreamed. We need to consider those with disabilities.
Now I give the floor to Karen Mallory for Renew.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the experts for their insightful presentations this afternoon. With the week that's in it, our Disability Rights Week, I just need to comment briefly on what is going on, not just in Europe, but in my own member state. According to the National Disability Authority in Ireland, from figures in the last census, more than 1 in 5 people live with a disability. Earlier this year, the Health Service Executive in Ireland confirmed there are 1,227 people under the age of 65 living in nursing homes due to a lack of more suitable community-based residential placements. This is ultimately a failure of our system to cater for people with disability. It's a damning statistic when we consider that Article 19 of the UN CRPD recognises the equal right of all persons with disability to live independently in the community with choices equal to others. According to the ERSI, disabled people are 1.7 times more likely to experience housing deprivation than those without a disability. We have work to do. I was impressed by a number of speakers across other topics and other issues raised this afternoon. And I agree largely. In fact, when Darragh Lenihan from the Union of Students was here, he echoed many of the comments made by our friend from the European Youth Forum today. Congratulate you on that. Colleagues, we're here to talk about solutions, however. So at a recent meeting I attended with the Irish Wheelchair Association, John Fulham, the Public Engagement Manager, highlighted the need for universal design guidelines. And I was glad to hear Catherine Naughton refer to these indirectly this afternoon. These universal design guidelines for homes offer a flexible framework for designers to create future-proofed, people-centred housing. They provide checklists, floor plans, examples and guidelines for dementia-friendly dwellings to enhance accessibility. When we're building new homes, it's the way to go. It's the accessible way to do it, Chair. And I appeal to the committee and indeed to our Commissioner to bear that in mind as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Yes, now I give the floor to Mr. Oliveira for the left.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I also wanted to thank these speakers for their contributions in this public hearing. So thank you to all those who took part on behalf of different organisations. The housing crisis is reaching more and more layers of the population, not just people in poverty, but significantly people that are not living in poverty, but people can't afford a decent housing solution. And disabled people are doubly penalised. They are affected like everyone else in terms of access to housing, but then doubly because their specific needs are not taken into account. One of the speakers underscored the need to consider housing as a social good and not an economic activity. And that was really pertinent. The way that the market rules work, speculation, the lack of a public response to the housing problem is at the origin of many of these issues. What measures need to be taken to ensure that financing mechanisms from the EU do not feed the market in terms of its perverse effects, which are at the origin of these housing problems? How can we guarantee that EU funding does not push up real estate speculation or exclude people from housing, particularly disabled people? Given the specific needs of disabled people, these needs need to be taken into account. Given how the market works, particularly the real estate market. And then, in terms of deinstitutionalization, we need to have conditions in place so that people can have it and lead an independent life, and they're not abandoned or resigned to a life of exclusion. This is what we need to guarantee. As we've heard, we need investment in public services, social protection, health, and a whole array of other mechanisms. What responsibilities in terms of EU funding, particularly under the multi-annual financial framework, need to be mobilised to achieve these objectives? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now give the floor back to our speakers for a maximum of 2 minutes each, starting with Mr. Urbani.
Thank you very much. In terms of these special design characteristics for disabilities, I fully agree. I would say that in Italy we have quite a good framework, but any guideline from the EU, I think, could be more than welcomed. I would like to take the point of Mr. João Oliveira about the need of any resource not to feed the market. I call it gentrification. This is something that unfortunately we experienced. The better the social housing project, the higher the risk of gentrification. My answer is the cooperative movement, where housing cooperative work, then the neighborhood is not gentrificated, and they tend to maintain properly the real estate that they develop, and to look after the community, and to keep all the prices down within the neighborhood. But the risk is there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Mrs. Knott.
Thank you very much. So I want to just respond mainly on the question about cost. Even though for the European Disability Forum, cost is not the central issue, it's the issue of people with disabilities like everybody else having the opportunity to live where and with whom they want. But institutions are not cheaper. All studies show that it's maybe cost neutral, but it's a little bit deeper than this. So in terms of institutional care, there are high fixed costs. So institutions create a lot of costs by themselves, the infrastructure, the staffing and the maintenance. It might look like there's economies of scale having people all living together, but there's a lot of additional societal cost to that, including health complications, long-term dependency, social isolation. And of course, as MEP Sequeira has also pointed out, people are not economically active when they're in institutions. They're also not going to be in the labour market, and they're more in a recipient mode. But I have to say the most important thing here is we all remember during COVID, many of us were living in apartments that we could not leave. We were not allowed to leave. So you just imagine somebody living in an institution, a permanent ban on leaving their house. So this isn't just an economic factor. In terms of independent living, there are lower long-term costs. Community-based support and personal assistance are generally less expensive than maintaining big institutions. People have much higher chance of economic participation, working, paying taxes, but also taking part in family and community life. and the flexibility. The funding it's not the same for everybody. Some people need more or less support, so it's much more likely to be nuanced. So as I said, the studies show that they're cost neutral, so there isn't an economic excuse for not transitioning from large-scale institutions to independent living. And lastly, there was some discussion here about different approaches, but I think already the EU has done a lot of groundwork, and we've seen that laws are very impactful in terms of accessibility, and the standards are already developed that can be used and can be included in the funding regulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Mr. Voice.
Yes, thank you. Wow, a lot of food for thought. I'm going to take them one by one, and I think the first point I'd like to make is on the housing crisis. I think it's a term that can sometimes be a bit misleading for young people, because it tends to imply that this moment that we're traversing is departing from a usual standard of a housing market that is very good and supports young people in their transition to adulthood and so on. Whereas for many young people who are alive today and who are young today, this crisis and this market in its current format is all we've known. So I think it's important to just put this in perspective. In terms of what could be done and what are the tools at your disposal, an interesting avenue to explore could be having a new target for social housing stock, because in all of the discussion, all these debates, we speak a lot about the need for less for-profit and more public cooperative and community and social housing, and setting a target at the EU level for this could be one of the first steps to begin with. Then having maybe a set of universal quality guidelines for all housing. We know oftentimes, and I think many of us have been the victims of this potentially in the private market, when housing units are being built, there are seldom robust and strong guidelines for safety, for the quality of these new housing units being built. And then, of course, we have the affordable housing plan coming up. I think there will be a huge avenue of opportunity and window of opportunity for this House to send a very clear message in terms of what the EU prioritizes. So having a very clear prioritization when it comes to funding of not-for-profit, community, public, and social housing. So having this prioritized when it comes to EU funding, to make sure that all EU-supported housing projects contribute to a healthier housing market. And then, of course, in our view, also in view of what I think Member Oliveira said, all housing projects that are supported through EU funds should include a non-speculation clause, to make sure that those units that are being built cannot, that they remain not-for-profit in the long term, and that they do not lead, again, to an increase in the financialization and the distortion of housing solely for profit instead of for people as a right. So I think there are a few points. We have many more thoughts. We can share them with you, but for now, I'd say these are the headlines.
Thank you very much. And Mrs. Wojcinska.
Thank you. Well, I can supplement what I have said already with regards to the savings and cost effectiveness. For 10 years, for which I have data about our Gdańsk program, about 500 people participated. And the costs which would be associated with placing these people in the institutions would be about €1,000 per month. So we made such savings because these people did not go to institutions. However, the costs are different depending on the person with disability. For some persons, the cost of support is higher, much higher. For others, it's lower. But people who are able to live in an open community in their own supported housing, such people do not generate those costs which are associated with living in an institution. And the people who live an independent life are often holding a job, and they can pay their own way, pay for their own upkeep. And they need services, And this translates into employment for assistants, for example. So overall, we calculated, basing our calculations on estimates, that over 10 years, the city of Gdańsk saved about 10 million zlotys, which is about 2.5 million euro. Well, this is money saved because it had not to be spent on keeping these people with needs in institutions. So the support provided for persons who are disabled, intellectually disabled, but who live independently. Well, this enables savings. So overall, the message is that independent living in the community is cheaper.
Thank you very much. And now we still have Mrs. Tatiana Marquez-Uriarte from the European Commission representing the Housing Task Force for the next 5 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairs. And thank you for organizing this event today and for giving the floor to the Commission. The European Affordable Housing Plan, which is going to be adopted by the end of the year, has one very clear objective, which is to promote, to make sure that there are more affordable housing, sustainable and quality housing. And when we talk about quality, we are also referring to accessible housing. We are very much aware that people with disabilities, they have more difficulties than other groups or other people to find an appropriate housing. That's the case because they normally have less wages, they have more difficulties to get to the employment world, and this is why they have more difficulties in making a career. They also have to pay higher price for houses because there are very few houses that are accessible, and if they are not, they need to do accessibility renovations. And more generally, the problem is that they have to compete with the few affordable houses that exist with people that do not have accessibility problems. So the number of houses that are available for them basically normally have a higher price. There are several ways, and we certainly are looking at how to integrate better the needs of people with disabilities into the plan. One of the issues we are looking at is helping member states to identify and quantify better what are the housing needs of people, vulnerable groups in general, but people with disabilities in particular. It has been said, I think, that about a quarter of the population of the EU has some sort of disability, and this number is is likely to increase with the time and demographics. We will all have at some point in our lives, either permanently or temporarily, some sort of disability and problem of mobility. Therefore, it's very important that member states, when they draft or they think about this housing strategy, they integrate these accessibility concerns in them. And the Commission can help very much with advice also to define, quantify, and map what are those needs and how to best integrate accessibility in their strategies for housing. Of course, it will be very important also, and this is general for all vulnerable groups, not only people with disabilities, that member states increase the share of social housing in their total building stock. And this is very important precisely for the issues that have been mentioned here of the objective of deinstitutionalize people in institutions that could perfectly live outside if they have the appropriate social and medical support sometimes. But in order to deinstitutionalize people, you need to have enough social housing, at least for in a first moment, to help them get out and find a place when they make an independent living. The third dimension where we can help is obviously financing, and of course we do not have so far specific financing for this in the existing under the existing MFF. But the Commission did a revision of the Cohesion Fund regulation to include housing, affordable housing, within the objectives that can be financed with the cohesion funds. And this, of course, also include renovation of houses and renovation in order to make them accessible. And in the proposal of the Commission made in June, we also have housing both in the competitiveness fund that we have promoted for the next MFF and in the new national and regional partnership plans. So housing is there, and within that housing, obviously also everything that has to do to make housing of quality, as I explained at the beginning. And finally, we can also help member states to exchange their experience, as we have been exchanging experiences from different people working on the ground on accessibility. Because by exchanging good practices, both on financing, but also maybe on how to make houses accessible from the design moment, they can also learn from each other and not do the same mistakes that obviously the ones who start, the pioneers, have made. But anyway, the European Affordable Housing Plan is not happening in a vacuum. Of course, housing is a new concern to some extent of the European Commission, but disabilities and equal opportunities is something that is in the Commission realm, the European Union realm for many years. And I would like to give the floor to my colleague from DG Just, who can explain very shortly what they are doing at the moment in terms of maybe standards.
Yes, we are over time, so shortly, please.
Well, very briefly, I will just say that we pay attention to this matter in the European Strategy for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which are what we are currently looking at as its second phase. We have a public consultation open, so we welcome input. But in concrete, in the issue of how to make a house accessible, we have European standard, as also Catherine Norton mentioned, 17210, which contains specific provisions that are to be complied with for a house to be accessible, but also there is a section on affordable housing. There are some common provisions. Let's not forget that it is not only the individual house, but the common parts of the building, the approach to the building, the entering of the building, and so forth. That standard provides that guidance, so it is not so much how or what requirements they need to fulfill, but a matter of commitment to do them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as we conclude, I would like to thank all of our speakers today for your clear and informative input, and all of the participants as well. I think the discussion highlighted the main barriers that remain in securing adequate, accessible and affordable housing, and also, of course, focused on the solutions, the role that local services, national authorities, and of course also the EU has to play in this regard. And in the Ample Committee, we will continue to prioritize these issues, promote inclusive solutions, and contribute to ensuring that housing policy fully respects and reflects the rights of persons with disabilities. So thank you again to all of you for participating in this important hearing. And I give the floor to my colleague.
Just join Lee in thanking all the participants and hoping indeed that this is not just today, but this is something that will be taken into account in all our future work and in the work of the European Commission. Thank you very much.